last holdouts in the civilized world. Slavery had been abolished throughout the European world by the 1830s. There's been a lot written about this. Slavery became called, including in the United States, beginning in the 1830s, as the peculiar institution, meaning how unlike we were like the rest of the world around us. There's a lot of talk about American exceptionalism. We were exceptional, but in a way not too many would want to have to deal with. And slavery was only replaced by something, if possible, even worse. Sharecropping, which was debt slavery, segregation, lynchings. By the 1890s, on average, about every day, a black person was being lynched in the South, typically because they were successful at what they did, and the envy got them hanged. And those hangings would be advertised. Grandparents would bring grandchildren and box lunches. It was in their newspapers, often front page, and they were proud of it. Other questions?
You might want to go into Lincoln's plans that were, of course, cut short by his assassination, but his plans for what his intent was to do with the South after the end of the war, and also what his different ideas were on what to do with the freed slaves.
Lincoln had, as you probably know, been a supporter. His role model in politics was Henry Clay. Henry Clay was one of the organizers of what became known as the American Colonization Society. Organized primarily by slaveholders in the South like Henry Clay, who would try and encourage masters to set slaves free and then colonize them in a country called Liberia, with its capital called Monrovia, after James Monroe. Lincoln supported that idea and tried it as president early in his presidency, except in Haiti, and it was an unmitigated disaster. Very few blacks wanted to go. Now this was home. They didn't know anything about Africa anymore, or Haiti for that matter. They wanted to stay. And he met with black leaders as he tried this experiment, and they told him, Lincoln, this isn't going to work. Our people won't accept it. Lincoln listened and changed. And changed. Read his last speech. Very few people know about it. It's what got him killed. His last speech, he was moving towards having blacks have the right to vote. Light years ahead of most of the American public at that time. When John Wilkes Booth heard that speech, he determined that would be the death of Lincoln, because he was an out-and-out racist. He couldn't accept the idea remotely of blacks having any kind of political power whatsoever. So Lincoln changes. If Lincoln lives, with that shift, our history turns out very different. His vice president had been a slaveholder, was a racist through and through, refused to meet with black leaders, even when like Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was one of Lincoln's advisors. There won't be another president to have advisors in the White House until Theodore Roosevelt. And there won't be another one after that until Franklin Roosevelt, after which it's become more customary. And Frederick Douglass said of Lincoln that Lincoln was the only white man that he'd ever met that made him feel like a complete equal. That speaks volumes of Abraham Lincoln. But Frederick Douglass had a very dim view of most white folks, much of it deserved. Read his July 4th speech in 1854. Read it, look it up. Because he said, it's your July 4th, it's not mine. You're independent, my people aren't.
Have you read O'Reilly's The Killing of Lincoln?
Which?
Have you read O'Reilly's new book, The Killing of Lincoln?
No, I haven't.
I just wondered how it's what.
I have studied that quite a bit. I don't claim to be an expert. But we know for a fact that that was, of all the presidents that have been killed, that's the one, no doubt about it, bona fide conspiracy. There's lots of speculation about Kennedy, of course, but no smoking guns. There's no doubt. And Davis had a cockamamie idea. He put together a group of people that couldn't have held up a corner grocery store. And their idea was to decapitate the Union government. So the South would be able to negotiate on their terms. By that time it was insane, but America's luck was out that day. What would have happened if Lincoln's bodyguard had stayed in his seat? Yes?
The book Killing of Lincoln, I'm reading it now, it's very enlightening. There's a lot of points in it that I never realized. And the events leading up to the assassination, it's really a good book.
Yeah, I'll have to read it. It's a... See the movie The Conspirator for one angle on this.
No, that,
It's interesting. It's an interesting take. But Mary Surratt, general suspicion is she almost had to know what was going on in the house. But that was a conspiracy. Yes?
my wife knows more what's going on in my house than I do.
Well, she ran a boarding house.
Yeah.
She ran a boarding house. But at any rate, probably the most significant thing to me about Lincoln is the day he was killed. Good Friday. Think of the symbolism. He died for his nation's sins. Jesus died for everyone's sins. Lincoln is one of the American leaders that's revered all around the world, even in some of the worst places. Any other questions? Let me end with one little story. True story about Abraham Lincoln, which helps set his character in an early date. That's a true story. Black Hawk War, I mentioned. Captain of the Illinois Militia. Story had been told from a number of sources that an older, rather decrepit Indian comes into their camp. His men want to shoot him. He's Indian, after all. Lincoln goes and stands between his men, and an Indian says, "Over my dead body." What does that tell you about his character? Wouldn't you or I have done that? Under those circumstances? You're dealing with a great man. For all of his failures. And for all the stories, you really did have a good marriage. Thank you.